Alrighty, hello everyone. We've got another Disney Lorcana Set 7 video here. And if you have been hit hard by the cost of living crisis and are now unable to open your favorite Disney Lorcana packs and have to buy singles instead, this video is for you. So today we're going to be looking at our buy list for the new Archazia Island set. We're going to be having a lot of the must-have cards that you need to buy ASAP so you can build your favorite decks, and then a few of the more believer cards that you might not necessarily see play straight away, but definitely can be good to have in the future. Now, this list is definitely not exhaustive, and definitely feel free to buy your favorite cards to fill out your fun decks. But these ones are what I think are going to be the most meta decks going into the first couple of weeks of the set, and cards you're going to want to get your hands on pretty early. Again, waiting until prices sort of settle a bit, that's something I would always advise. I definitely don't buy my singles sort of, pre-release week. I sort of wait until the card prices settle a little bit, just a little bit cheaper as well. But, if you're still one who likes opening packs as much as I do, that's always a good way to get your cards as well. So let's jump into the buy list. First, we're going to start off with the Amber cards. And you'll see here I've written that the Amber meta cards, these are the cards I think are going to be most impactful for some of your top Amber decks. And depends on what color you pair it with on what cards you're going to buy as well. So we see a few of the new Dual Ink cards. First off, we're going to start with the Troubadour, who's a Amber Steel card. Now, this card can almost be very similar to the Ursula card, Singer 4, and a 1/4 stat line technically with the resist. Obviously, the hit points means you can't get as much value off of the Rapunzel, but I think having the resist ability here can be quite useful. I think given it's an uncommon, it's probably going to be relatively cheap. Picking up 4 of this card could definitely see play in the future is going to be a must early on. Next up, we have the Aurora Walking Beauty, who's an Amber Legendary card. It's probably going to be a little bit pricey at the start. I think in a singer sort of deck, this could be quite a good card, being able to sort of sing a song, then heal up a character with Rapunzel, and then sing again. Could be quite impactful. Might sort of make room in the decks for this and Ariel as well, given they're both sort of targeted by Brawl. You sort of can overload your opponent's removal. It's going to be a really impactful card, being able to sing twice in the same turn, and it also quests for 2 as well. And that 1/4 stat line is pretty handy for the Rapunzel ability as well. Next we have Pascal, who's an Amber Amethyst Dual Link. Definitely going to be good slot into the aggro sort of Amber Amethyst deck here, being an evasive questing for 3 and a 3/3 stat line, meaning it's sort of out of reach of Brawl and Storm Rage on. However, given there's the uninkable, might just be sitting at a 2 count for most there, but given it's uncommon, hopefully a little bit cheaper, maybe you could just pick up 4 of that one as well. Next we have Isabella Madrigal, who's a 3/3 quest for 4. So questing for 1 more than Pascal does cost 1 more, but has the ability that whenever one of your characters sings a song, this character can't be challenged until the start of your next turn. So sort of having that evasive text there, meaning that it can't be challenged, is quite powerful as well. I think this could slot into a few sort of singer decks. So Steel Song comes to mind initially. Sort of maybe replacing that Gantu almost. However, it is uninkable, so I don't think you're commonly going to go up to the full 4 count, but maybe just picking up 3 for the time being. And if you open a few boxes, might even just fill out your 3 count of that as well. Next, we've got Our Lady, who's Amber Emerald. That new sort of returning archetype that's going to be sort of that aggro deck is now sort of realized from this card, being able to get 2 characters that cost 2 or less back from your discard. It does have a shift 3, so you can get that pretty early as well. And I think this card's just going to get better the more low-cost lady cards we get as shift targets as well. Being a 5 cost or 3 cost shift for a 4/4 quest for 2, and an awesome ability is very strong. However, in the aggro decks, you sort of want to limit your uninkable high count, so I think probably just getting this one at a 3, given that it is a super rare, or maybe even just a 2 could be fine. Next, we have a Snow White. A new sort of ability here we haven't really seen before is this character can't be challenged, and being a 2/2 quest for 2 is going to be quite strong when it can't be challenged as well. However, it can still get taken out by a lot of those actions like Storm Rage on, Strength, Brawl, even an Ice Block Sisu or Big Sisu. So being at a 4 cost might prove to be a little bit expensive, but given that's an uncommon, going to be pretty cheap. So I think picking up a playset of these is going to be quite valuable as well. Next, we have our Believer. So these cards are going to be somewhat impactful, maybe not right off the bat, but definitely something to keep an eye on. I think getting them early while they're cheap is going to be a good idea. So we've got our Mirabelle Madrigal, who's an Amber Amethyst dual ink. Nice evasive singer. Does get hit by the Sisu, but it is a Madrigal card, so it's going to be quite good for that new archetype there. Along with that, This Is My Family Song, or Family Madrigal. I'm not sure which song it is, but could be quite good for that one as well. But I think just being a singer and evasive is going to be quite good utility sort of all around as well. Next we have Pepper Madrigal, another sort of 4 of, given it's a common, can be quite cheap, and sort of similar to Alan Adale, except a little bit cheaper, but it is only when your characters sing a song. So something to keep in mind there, but another Madrigal character and sort of more broad utility as well, I think would be a good one to pick up. And next we have Coda, the small fish bear, who's a 3 cost 2/2 quest for 3. Could be a good include for some of those Amber Amethyst or Amber Emerald aggro decks. Questing for 3 on a 3 cost is pretty good. Might sort of see some play, especially given that's inkable. So, pick up your 4 if you are a aggro lover. Next for our Amber Emerald, we have Perla, who I think is an interesting card. It's sort of similar to that Surhis, but does cost 1 more, but has support and an extra willpower. Not sure how impactful the willpower will be, but I think that evasive tag is always something to keep an eye out for. Could be quite powerful if you sort of pair it with the Daisy. So you quest and then you get Daisy +3 to start taking things out as a 4/4 that only costs 1. Be powerful there. So I think uncommon going to be cheap. Pick up 4 early on. Next, we have a bit of an interesting one is the Tramp, who I think is going to be quite important to have in that Amber Emerald aggro deck. Being able to pay 1 less for each character you have in play could get it down to even something like a 3 cost for a 2/6 quest for 2, which is pretty good stats on a potential 3 cost. And then the ability is quite interesting as well. When you play this character, you can draw a card, then discard a card for each character you have in play. Being able to sort of draw into your Lilos, and even the new Glass Slipper and Cinderella could be quite good as well for that instant war gain. And then also powering up the Chernoblogs. I think this card might even be up to a 4 of in that Amber Emerald aggro deck. So I think that's a important card to pick up. Given it's a rare, it might be a little bit more expensive, so that's why I've just put it out at 3, but I think you could easily get 4 of this card. A couple of the other ones as well that aren't on here, being that Cinderella and Glass Slipper. I think those are 2 other ones that definitely could have considerations for getting from the amber color. Alrighty, next we have our Amethyst cards. A lot of good Amethyst cards in this set. A lot of obvious ones here, obviously the Iago, Giant Cobra, and the Raja. I think the illusion's all very powerful, and getting 4 of all of those will be very important, especially the Giant Cobra, who gets 2 lore when you play it if you discard another card. I think them just being so overly statted for their cost is going to be super powerful in the meta, and getting 4 of those is a good idea here. I've got 2 of the Panic, who's basically like a budget sort of bell. It is common compared to a super rare for the bell, so it's going to be a lot cheaper to get. I don't think we'll commonly see this card go more than a 2 of. I think Amethyst just has so many good cards to put in that you'd rarely go over that amount. So I think just having it as a 2 cost is a good idea here. Next, we've got our Magical Maneuvers card, who's a 2 cost inkable action. Return chosen character of yours to your hand and exert chosen character. I think this card's being slept on a little bit. Probably a good card here. Could almost replace the Elsa. You can return a character to your hand, such as Madame M. Fox, and then play it back down, so you get the exert chosen character and the rush effect as well. Obviously, you don't get the evasive, but still quite an impactful card here that can, give you some flexibility in how you use it as well. Next, we have a very nice new song, This Is My Family. It's basically like a gathering knowledge and wisdom, but instead of gaining 2, you get 1. You get to draw a card as well. So gaining 1 that replaces yourself is going to be a very good card in the meta, especially in those burn aggro decks like a Ruby Amethyst or even the Amber Amethyst aggro deck. So definitely going to want 4 of these, being such a low-cost song that replaces itself. It's very strong. And next we have the Amethyst list of the Believer cards. So Honey Marin, I think, is a bit of a slept-on one at the moment, getting a 1 more pretty much every time you play it, because your opponent's almost going to have an exerted character in play. It's very strong in an aggro deck. And next we got Bucky. So I'll sort of think about this one a little bit. I think we've seen cards like Cusco in the past be quite good when you banish to draw a card, and Bucky is similar to that, except it has a bit more stats. So something interesting that might be worthwhile thinking about in an aggro deck, just sort of being able to replace itself and sort of keep the board under control a little bit as well. Next, we have Merlin, who's a new Blurple card. So whenever this character quests, you can name a card and reveal the top card of your deck. It's the name card, put it into your inkwell face down and exert it. Quite a good combination with things like Merlin's Cottage and the new Dawson and Ursula's Cauldron, but not quite going to be up at that meta, I don't think, at the start at least, until someone maybe cracks it open a little bit. So I've got it as a 4 of in the Believer, but we'll have to wait and see how impactful it becomes. Next we have Diablo, again similar to that Sir Hiss, except instead of a 3 strength, it's 1 strength with Challenger 2 and 1 extra willpower. Again, I don't think it's going to replace Sir Hiss, but I think having an option for a good Diablo removal in a 2 cost is going to be quite potentially important. So I think picking that up that one early as well. Now this Show Me More card is really quite interesting. So each player drawing 3 cards, definitely an important card for an aggro deck where you're not too concerned about your opponent drawing cards and you just need to refill your resources. Could also be potentially good in a mill deck. We know Amethyst already has a lot of mill cards, and being able to draw 3 whilst your opponent also technically mill 3 off the top of their deck is quite strong as well. And our last one for the Amethyst buy list, we've got the Mufasa, who's basically a Maui half shark killer here with the 5 strength and 7 willpower with a resist 1. I think this card's probably not quite there just yet, but as we get more Mufasa shift options, this card's going to get better and better with those stats for a shift 5. Insane stats really for a 5 cost potentially with evasive and quest for 2 with those stats. Going to be a very strong card. I just think we need some better shift options in the future potentially for that one. But definitely a good one to pick up while you can. Alrighty, on to the Emerald cards now. You'll notice as we get through, the cards sort of get less and less because there are less dual links sort of ordered. First up, we have the Baymax, which is a Sapphire Emerald card. Definitely fixes a lot of the Sapphire Emerald issues here with sort of losing out on the early tempo. So being able to shift this turn 3 onto a TPO and have a 5/5 body sort of keep control over the board is going to be very strong. And I think you need 4 of these at the moment with things like Fishbone Quill and TPO and Strike a good match to filter through the Uninkables and also Hidden Incaster. You can sort of opt to potentially play a few more of these as well. Next one, you see sort of limited on some of the Emerald cards with the meta. I think this Anastasia is probably one of the better ones, being similar to sort of Cursed Mirthrak, except it has a 3 strength and is inkable. Obviously in cards like in matchups like the Steel deck, you're probably not going to play this card since it can be banished so easily, but against any other match up, you can sort of play this and have a pretty good board present quester that can sort of trade in with the Fox. I think this is going to be quite a good card you want to have and provide sort of that early low pressure as well. Next we have our Emerald Coil. Probably not a 4, might even go down to sort of like a 2 or a 3 off, but being able to give a character evasive is very strong. As we see with Diablo, it can be quite hard to remove. And I think being able to give characters evasive that you can also challenge with is really cool as well. So potentially you play the Baymax and then you ink a card so you can give it evasive to take out a Maui half shark as well. It can be very strong. So a good offensive and defensive card as well, since it does go through your opponent's turn. Next we have Pete the Space Pirate. I think an excellent shift option for the 3 cost Pete. It is a 5/5 quest for 2 for a shift 4, so same stats as the Baymax. However, can't be shifted onto anything. This character also has the ability that characters can't exert or opposing characters can't exert to sing songs, and your player characters gain resist 1 when this character is exerted. So pretty good option to play Pete on 3 and then shift this on 4 and quest, and then basically since from turn 3 your opponent can't sing any songs, which is pretty strong as well. And also potentially pair it with the Gantu, which we're going to talk about shortly as well. Now we've got a few Emerald Believers here. I think some of these could probably be bumped up a little bit. I think the Baymax and the Parcher are quite good cards. Parcher being able to potentially quest for 3, and also the Baymax questing for 2 at a 2 cost. They're quite good cards, so I could almost see you picking up those cards off the bat, since they are commons as well, going to be reasonably cheap. The Baymax being an inkable Banzai that can just play exerted, but there's not going to be too many things challenging the Baymax that early on. Next we have the Shere Khan. I think probably getting this as a 2-off for your aggro decks, unless you're looking at building sort of the Emerald Amethyst sort of block discard with the Goose, with the Kronk and the Yzma, then you can play this and not discard your hand. I think otherwise you're just going to get 2 for the aggro decks. And we've got Yzma, which another sort of good cycle through your deck card that we see a lot with Steel. Playing this card, I think also in the Emerald Amber aggro deck, again with the Rapunzel, or not the Rapunzel, the Cinderella and the Glass Slipper, could be a good way to sort of have that instant lore gain in a color that normally doesn't have it as well. Talked about Parcher, I think probably picking up 4 of them anyway might be a good shout as well. And we have the Daisy Duck, who's a bit of an interesting card here. I initially thought this card was any time you put a card into your input, but it is only once during your turn, so potentially could be a good option in the Amber, in the Sapphire Emerald combination, where you try and discard your opponent's hand and then use the Muses to bounce the little guys, and then you can use the Daisy Duck to finish off the big guys by inking a card. So potentially a good option there, but I don't think it would ever get more than a 2 of. Same for the Ink Geyser, I think can be quite a good option when you sort of play down maybe like a Clarabelle or a Daisy Duck and then play Ink Geyser. Basically means your characters are safe from being banished against Ruby Sapphire. I think this card really changes Ruby Sapphire matchup and quite favourable for this deck, but just depends how much of it we think we're going to see. I think against any Sapphire decks, this Ink Geyser card can be very powerful. So I think so it depends on the meta a little bit and a bit of testing to see where this card sort of ends up in the list. Next we have the Return of Hercules, a really cool new card. I haven't seen anything like this before. Being able to play a character for free, but your opponent also gets to do it. So with that sort of stipulation, I think you're going to be hard-pressed to play this as a 4-off, except maybe something like the action-heavy Ruby Emerald deck. So I think having this at a 3 cost for potentially some fun gimmicks is going to be enough going forward. And that is it for the Emerald cards. Let's have a look at our Ruby ones. So Ruby here, there wasn't really too many cards I sort of thought were must-haves. I think these sort of potential ones could be quite fun and in sort of new and upcoming decks. Obviously, we've got the Bell. I think as a 2-odd, you probably wouldn't play it any more than that, given it's quite expensive, but it is inkable. So I definitely could see that going up, but being it is a super rare, we're going to be a little bit expensive, so I think just keeping it at a 2 count for now would be good. Yeah, you see a lot of these have quite high rarities, so going to be quite expensive cards. Sort of pick and choose which deck you're playing to sort of see if you need these. The Radigan, I think, similar to Mountly Harshark, but does need to be exerted. It doesn't have evasive, so it's going to be able to be removed pretty easily, but being able to play this, quest it, and then burn a bunch of actions, especially in something like a Ruby Amethyst burn deck, could be quite good. So definitely something to think about there, especially if you're singing a lot of songs and not needing to use that ink to play the actions as well, could be quite strong. So I think if you're going to play a deck like that, definitely going to need 4 of these, but it just depends on which decks you're going to try out for the new set. Next we have Mushu, is going to be the new talked about card from this set, I'd say. Has the ability that whenever your character is challenged, they gain resist, and if they banish a character, they get 2 lore, and they gain resist 2. So very strong card for the Ruby Steel. See if it'll push it up enough to push it into that tier 2, tier 1 deck slot, but still not too sure about this card. But I think if you're going to play Ruby Steel, you definitely need 4 of this card. Next we have Blue, so probably one that's been overlooked a little bit. I think definitely not a must-have card, but I think having the ability to prevent your Maui Half Shark from taking any damage is very strong. And I think in things like the mirror match, if you have a Maui Half Shark and they have one in play and they quest and they're happy for the trade, you can just play the blue down and then challenge in, and your Maui Half Shark sticks around. So I think this card probably won't be anything more than a one of, but I think could definitely still be an interesting card to sort of swing matchups with Ruby with the Maui Half Shark. So that's why I've got this as a one of. I don't think it'll be any more than that, but I imagine this card will be pretty cheap early on. So definitely pick up at least one, I'd say. Next for our Ruby Steel color as well, we've got the Mulan with the Shift 5 evasive, and whenever this character challenges another character, all of your characters you can challenge ready characters this turn. Definitely a really strong card for the Ruby Steel deck that's all about challenging, especially if your opponent decides to not quest. You shift in the Mulan and start taking out characters with the Mushu in play. It's going to be pretty devastating. So we've got a couple of good Mulan shift targets, so I think this card's going to be a 4 for a Ruby Steel deck. Maybe not quite 4, could say there's either 2 or 3, but I haven't tested it too much, so I'll have to see what we end up getting. But I think card's probably going to be a bit cheaper on sort of early on, so I think if you can pick it up for a few dollars here or there, it's probably going to be a good idea. Next, we've got our Believer Ruby cards. So these cards probably not going to see instant play, but definitely have potential, I'd say. The Queen of Hearts, mainly paired up with the Ruby Emerald Queen of Hearts, which damages characters when they're played, or even using something like Teeth and Ambitions. If you can deal 1 damage to this character, you're getting a 4/3 for 2, which is pretty strong. Normally that would be a 3-cost card. So basically getting this out a turn earlier and has a good shift target for the Queen as well. I think if you're playing that Ruby Emerald damage deck, this card's you're getting a 4 of. Cogsworth with sort of Ruby Sapphire heavy item deck, having a 5/3 for 3 is pretty strong as well. Being able to take out other sort of 5-cost characters like the Maui Hero to All almost sort of gets up there for a Flamasham, but having a 5/3 can be quite powerful, taking out some other high willpower cards. I think being a common's going to be pretty cheap, so you can pick up 4 of those. The Beagle Boys, whenever this character quests, chosen character of yours gains rush and resist 1. Wasn't super keen on this card since it costs 4 and your 5-cost cards you're mainly playing going to be Maui Hero to All, which has rush anyway, but potentially could wait a turn and use this with the Maui Half Shark to give it resist and rush to challenge the same turn it's played. So I definitely could see this having an impact. So probably wouldn't be more than a 2 of, but it is uncommon, so feel free to splurge a bit and get the full 4. Next we've got Moana, who's basically a genie killer here, being a 4/3. You can take out a genie and survive, and also give another chosen character of yours +3 this turn. So that's a lot of strength going around. I think this card, again, going to be an uncommon, pretty cheap. Pick up 4 of in your Ruby decks in case we get into a heavy genie meta again. Could potentially even use this to give +3 strength to another evasive character, maybe even a Moana to take out a Maui Half Shark as well. Next, we've got 2 rare cards. The first one is We've Got Company, so you can ready all your characters and they gain Reckless this turn. Potentially could be good in the Ruby Steel deck where you can quest with all your characters and play this to ready them all, and then they can start challenging again to get that extra lore from the Mushu. Uninkable, 3 costs. Yeah, probably wouldn't be more than 2 count in the decks, but if you can pick up a couple of these cheap, definitely do so. Then we've got the Devil's Eye Diamond. Now, any card that sort of says gain a lore, you have to sort of look at pretty closely, as that can be really impactful sort of towards the late game in aggro decks as you sort of run out of steam. Red decks have a lot of ways to damage themselves and also even just challenging. And even if it's banished, you can use this card to gain the lore, I believe. So I think this is going to be a interesting card to sort of put in potentially that burn Ruby Amethyst deck. You do have a lot of character and board presence, and maybe you can sort of use this to sort of finish off the games as well. Or maybe even that Ruby Emerald damaging deck as well, being able to gain a lore or 2 every turn is pretty strong and pretty reasonably priced for 2. And it's got a very nice enchanted as well. All right, next we've got our Sapphire Meta cards. I'm sure everyone has seen all of these before. First, we've got our Scrooge McDuck, who's a new legendary. You can play for free if you exert 4 items, and basically has the ability to, you can look at the top 4 and grab an item there, put the rest on the bottom. I think in Sapphire Steel, there's probably going to be a 4 of, unfortunately, going to be quite an expensive legendary. So I think if you're looking at playing Sapphire Steel, definitely going to need this card, but potentially waiting maybe a couple of weeks just before set champs. See if you can use proxies in the meantime, because it is going to be quite an expensive card on release, I would have thought. Next, we've got Bell, another really good card. Fortunately, not going to be as expensive, I would say, as this Scrooge, given it's a common and it is in the starter decks as well. Definitely going to want to pick up 4 of this card. Being able to play for free on turn 1 is pretty strong, and having 8 1-drop items in Sapphire Steel is going to be a very important card. Next, we've got the Tamatoa, who can grab 2 items back from the discard when you play it, as well with things like Flavisham and Bell, also using Popsicle to heal. I think probably not going to play the full 4 for this one. You know, you're not super often going to get the quest off to play an item for free, and if you are, you might not even have the dime in your hand. So, bit of a tricky one to get the second ability off, but I think just for the first ability alone, you're going to play this card just to get the items back and cycle that draw engine. Alrighty, next, the card everyone's talking about, the Sapphire Coil, having that ability to give a -2 strength to a character when you put a card into your Inkwell. Pretty strong paired with things like Sisu and Brawl. I've heard a lot of talk of people wondering when you're going to play this card, but even slowing your deck down a little bit to play this on 2, followed by a Sisu on 3 to banish a 3 strength character is pretty good as well. You know, then maybe ramping on 4, and then you can sort of play your Maui Half Shark on 5. So I think playing this on 2 isn't as bad as it seems. I think uncommon, reasonably cheap, hopefully, even though it is a very strong card. I think definitely going to want to pick up 4 of these, especially since it's inkable. I could easily see 4 going into a deck, a Ruby Sapphire deck specifically. Maybe even something like a Ruby or a Sapphire Emerald deck to pair with the Muses as well. Next, we've got our Believer list. There's quite a few in here because I thought these are all very interesting cards. We can sort of pair the Hey Hey, the Jasmine, and the Lady Cluck together, since they're all sort of part of this new ally deck that I think might be really fun to try out. The Hey Hey obviously puts all your cards from your hand into your Inkwell, but then you can use Jasmine to quest and draw cards for each ally you have in play. Things like Lady Cluck and Hey Hey are allies, as well as a new steel card we're going to see, hopefully. So, I think this could be a fun little deck. You basically ramp a whole lot with Hey Hey and then draw up cards with Jasmine, maybe draw into a whole new world, and then sort of go from there. Even having things like Flavisham in play to quest and discard your item to draw cards after you play the Hey Hey as well. I think this could be a fun new sort of ally archetype as well. Speaking of ally, we've got Penny the Orphan here, who has Ward when you have a hero in play, and quest for 2, 1 strength. So pretty good stats with the 1 strength, given you have a Ward if there's a hero in play. Something like that. Jasmine there is a hero. So I think, you're not too worried about the 1 willpower, since things won't be able to target you with songs. Maybe something like a Grab Your Sword or a Tinkerbell, but being able to quest for 2 and deal 2 damage in return is quite a nice little card, and is a common, so probably going to be pretty cheap to pick up. Next, we have Matthias, who gives your queen characters Ward for a 2 cost, 3/2. Pretty good stats for a 2 cost. We had the Baymax, who was a 3/2, but he quest for 2, but had a pretty downside ability. Now we've got a nice upside in a queen sort of deck. I think you're probably going to play 2. Given it's a common, it's going to be pretty cheap. Not really seeing too much play. You probably get it as a 4-off. I think this card could be quite interesting in sort of like a queen themed deck. Giving them Ward's going to be quite strong as well. So I think, picking up a few of this card would be nice and cheap early on as well. The next interesting one we have is Water Has Memory. Now, I feel like the best spot for this card is going to be in Emerald Sapphire, being able to sort of dig 4 cards deeper to find your Bend to My Will. Mind you don't get to draw it, but you've got things like Firebell and Flavisham and Popsicle that you can play to draw cards as well. But also you can play this after a Bend to My Will and sort of choose a bad card for your opponent to draw into after a Bend to My Will. So pretty strong card there. Is uninkable, doesn't really replace itself, so probably not going to be too high of a count in the deck, but I think at least a 2-off is going to be really interesting to test out in a deck like that. And finally, we have our steel cards. Quite a few cool new steel cards in this set, so let's jump into them. First of all, we've got our Helga Sinclair, which is basically a fantastic Diablo Slayer that can't really be banished by many actions, having a 4 willpower and has Challenger 3, so it can take out a Diablo in a cove, and it gets evasive during your turn, most importantly. Is uninkable, but sort of is similar to that Aladdin, or not Aladdin, that Jim Hawkins that gets +2 Challenger every time you put a card into your inkwell, except this card gains evasive instead. So I think this card could definitely see play if we get into a more Diablo heavy meta in the future as well. And next we have Jafar, who gives a character Challenger 2 when you play him. Is a 3/2 quest for 2. Could pair nicely with something like that new Mickey that when you banish a character, you get to play a character for free. Giving that Challenger 2 can take out a lot of those early game characters if your opponent leaves them exerted. And it also quests for 2, so it's sort of the steel version of the crab, I would say. Definitely an interesting card, and being inkable, you're probably going to play 4 of if you decide to play it as well. Here we have the new Mulan, which we were talking about earlier as a shift target, and the same ability as Simba, but a 2/1 stat line is infinitely better than a 1/2 stat line. So probably the new best one drop for, steel decks here, and can sort of help cycle as well through things like that Lilo. And even if you end up with 2 docks in your hand as well, being able to discard one of them, definitely a cool card as a 1 cost and a 2/1 as well. So I definitely think 4 of those cards you're going to need to pick up. Next we have Gantu, who's sort of shutting down actions and songs here. So when you play him, your opponent can't, or when you play as characters, can't exert to sing songs until the start of your next turn. Not too big of a deal for you because you can always just sing before you play this card. And by the time it gets to your next turn, you can sing again. But also each player pays 2 or more to play actions or items. So if your opponent wants to play a Popsicle, now costs 3. They want to brawl this, it costs 5. So if they have to do that, you're not too upset. It's a 1-for-1 trade, but they've had to pay an extra ink. So I think this card's going to be potentially not as impactful straight off the bat, but I think could definitely see some pay. Obviously, being uninkable, it's a little bit tricky, but I think definitely a 3 of. Probably won't replace Pete, but definitely in addition could be quite interesting as sort of a pseudo control deck, especially if we see a lot of Ruby Sapphire running around, which I'm sure we will. The next one I was a little bit unsure about whether to put this in the meta one of the Believers, but the back hero being a 4/3 bodyguard quest for 2, and when this is banished during an opponent's turn, deal 2 damage to each opposing character. Now, initially, I wasn't too hot on this card. Your opponent can decide when to trigger it, basically by banishing it with a lot of the lower willpower characters so that you don't get banished from the effect. But being able to quest for 2 and a 4/3 already with a bodyguard, I think sort of puts it up there good enough, I think, to at least play a 2 of in some of these steel amber decks, potentially, like the Diggy Hole. Could be an interesting replacement for the Chien-Po. Going to be banished in 1 hit a lot of the time, but definitely an interesting one with the ability to sort of keep the board under control. So I think probably going to be one of the cheaper legendaries, sort of in that middle range, but I think picking up 2 of is going to be quite useful. I think this card might not see play right off the bat, but definitely could in the future. Next, we've got our last lot of levers from our steel cards. You'll see here we've got a few of the ally synergy. So Miss Bianca, being able to play cheaper if you have an ally in play, and also Aladdin, that you can play an ally for free that costs 3 or less when he quests, and also your exerted ally characters get +1. Now, mainly, I think this card is quite good for the Lady Cluck. Giving it 3 strength instead of 2 means things like the Big C, so you can't banish it. So it's really only the Be Prepared, which you can actually block with the Pete as well. So I think that's quite a good ability on the Aladdin. It does have to be exerted and does cost 4, but potentially you could play this on 4 and then play the Lady Cluck on 5, and also play another ally for 3 cost or less for free. So that Aladdin, I think, will be part of that new ally deck. But uninkable, probably not going to play too many, maybe 2 or 3 to pick up there. But Bianca being inkable, and I think basically a Scrooge McDuck that costs or quests for 1 less and is inkable most of the time. pretty good card, I think, having that stats of 5/5 and potentially 6/5 with 11 as well. Now we see we've got the Mickey Mouse here. Definitely a bit of a meme card, I think, which is why I put in the Believer. But I think being able to play a character for free is definitely a good ability to have. And I think is better than the Trumpeter Mickey as well, being able to sort of put a hold on the board so your opponent can't really quest until they banish this character, because now you've got things like the Jafar that you can give challenges to this and basically take out any 3 willpower character. And there's a lot of sort of high cost characters out there that don't see too much play, that being able to play for free would be a huge advantage. So I think this can sort of act similarly to Calhoun, that can sort of put a freeze on the board for a little bit until it's vanished, but it's going to be a bit easier to remove than a Calhoun. So that's why I put it in the Believer, but definitely could see some fun decks coming out of this card here. Now, last card we have Arzal, who has the ability that whenever one of your characters challenges another character, if it's the second challenge this turn, gain 3 lore. So we see things like the Pyros and the Scar that they ready whenever they challenge and banish. So having this in play, being able to rush in with Scar, banish character, challenge again, you get 3 lore as well. And if you've got a Mushu in play, you can banish 2 characters, get 4 lore, and then gain 3 from this, gain 7 just from 2 challenges. So I think this card could be quite interesting if you sort of go around that challenge and ready effect. So that's why I've sort of put it here. It is sort of a little bit gimmicky, so I'll put in the Believer list here. But I think that is sort of where it'll end up, I think, in just sort of that Ruby Steel. A little bit gimmicky, but definitely could see some play, especially if we move more towards sort of board-based games as well, where challenging is superior. So that'll be the end of our buy list here. I hope you can take away something to go buy some new cards with the set releasing in just a couple of days. Hope this was helpful. If you've enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and if you have any cards that you think weren't on the list, put them down in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video.